Week 10 of the fantasy football season. Here's a few defense DSTs I'd have off the wire this week. The first one, the Carolina Panthers. Panthers out there in 98% of fantasy leagues. They got a great match coming up here in Week 10 versus Saints. They give up the 6th most fantasy points to DSTs on the season. But this Panther defense in Week 9, they went into Lambeau Field, a tough place to play, and they held that offense down and won the ball game. So the last few weeks for Carolina's DST. Week 7 at the Jets, 6 points allowed, 6 sacks, 2 interceptions. Week 8 versus the Bills, 40 points allowed, 2 sacks. And Week 9 at Green Bay, like I said, 13 points allowed, a sack, an interception, and a fumble recovery. So this defense, they're playing good football for the most part. I know that Bill game, they got blown out, giving up 40 points. But besides that, they've gone out there and they're making plays the last 2 out of 3 games. And with a bad Saint team coming in with Tyler Show in their quarterback, the rookie, and possibly trading a couple players away before the deadline tomorrow, I think this Panther defense, they could go out there as a good streaming option and make some plays in this one. And especially coming off a big game, this defense is probably amped up to go back out there and play good football again. The next DST, the Buffalo Bills. So this Bill DST, a lot of injuries they've dealt with this season and underperforming. But I thought they played a good game in the Week 9 victory versus a high-powered Chief offense. The last few weeks for this Bill DST, Week 6 at Atlanta got the doors blown off, 24 points allowed, 2 sacks, a block kick. Week 8 at Carolina, 9 points allowed, 7 sacks, an interception, 2 fumble recoveries. In Week 9 versus the Chiefs, 21 points allowed, 3 sacks, and interception. So this defense, after the bye week, they've come out now. They fixed up their run defense, which was one of the worst in the league, after giving Bijan Robinson over 200 yards from scrimmage on that Monday night game in Week 6. And they've shut down running backs, and they're playing good defense. So with Buffalo confident and a great matchup in Week 10 at the Miami Dolphins, they give up the 8th most fantasy points to DSTs on the season, and they pretty much only got Devon Achane and Jalen Waddle as legit options on that offense. I think Buffalo once again goes out there and plays a good game. The next DST, the Chicago Bears. So this Bear defense, they do give up a lot of points. I've said that in the other videos all season long. They're out there right now in 72% of fantasy leagues, but they get to the quarterback, they create turnovers, and with giving up points, they still at least do the other things you need to put up fantasy points. Week 7 versus New Orleans, 14 points allowed, 4 sacks, 3 interceptions, a fumble recovery. Week 8 at Baltimore, 30 points allowed, 2 sacks. In Week 9 at Cincinnati, you gave up 42 points in that one, but 3 sacks, 2 interceptions, and a fumble recovery. So like I said, they get to the quarterback is this defense. Their fast unit, Marquez Sweat leading the way, obviously, for Chicago. And now they got a great matchup in Week 10 versus Jackson Dart and this banged-up New York Giant offense that gives up the 9th most fantasy points to DSTs on the season. So Chicago, like I said, their offense is going to put points on the board, and the defense will give up the points, but they get to the quarterback, one of the better sack teams in the league, and also create turnovers. So with those factors and a good matchup versus a Giant offense that's depleted with Neighbors and Scatterbo out for the season, and Dart with some, scraps left in that offense of Wando Robinson, Theo Johnson, and Slayton, I think Chicago in Soldier Field, they get off to a good lead, and obviously they tee off and make some plays in the second half of that game. The next DST is the Cleveland Browns. So this Brown defense is a defense you actually could go on the waiver wire now and get, and they're available in 70% of fantasy leagues. So before the Monday night game, you could just add them if you got a roster spot and play them here in Week 10 at the Jets. That obviously one of the worst offenses in the league. It took them 2 weeks before their offense exploded. In Week 8 was New York to put touchdowns on the board. So Cleveland, like I said, one of the best Ds in the league. Myles Garrett leading the way. Denzel Ward in the secondary. Week 7 versus Miami, 6 points allowed, 4 sacks, 3 interceptions, a fumble recovery, and a touchdown. Week 8 at New England, 30 points allowed, 6 sacks, a fumble recovery. So this week, good matchup at the Jets. 4th most fantasy points to DSTs on the season. And we know Myles Garrett, the best pass rusher, in my opinion, in all the NFL. He gets to the quarterback effortless. You could put 2 guys on him. He's still going to get there. And this Jet O-line is young and not a great offensive line. And Justin Fields, he's a quarterback. If he's back starting once again, that holds on to the football way too long. So with all those factors, I think the Browns this week are a great add. And like I said, available in 70% of fantasy leagues. And the final DST staying in the same game is the New York Jets, another defense you could just go out there and put on your roster right now and not have to waste a waiver if you got the roster spot available in 92% of fantasy leagues. And this could be a grinded out the ball game where it's like 13-9 final or something like that here in Week 10, where Cleveland, their offense is bad. Obviously, Dylan Gabriel, he hasn't done much. so far since he's been their quarterback. Besides Quinshon Judkins, Harold Fannin, and Njoku, this offense pretty much hasn't done much. And this New York Jet defense, 2 out of 3 games they've actually gone out there and held the opponents down in those mid-teens. Week 6 versus Denver, 13 points allowed, sack, fumble, recovery, or safety. Week 7 versus the Panthers, 13 points allowed, 2 sacks. And then Week 8 in the high-scoring victory at Cincinnati, 38 points allowed and a sack. So I know this Jet defense really isn't that good, but like I said, they've held opponents down in good offenses in Denver and Carolina to 13 points in those games. And this week versus Cleveland, the offense that really can't move the football, where it's pretty much 2 or 3 players and spare parts. I think New York coming off the bye and a home game and having a decent feeling, winning a high-scoring one in Cincinnati, they could be a good streaming option this week. Available 92% of fantasy leagues. That's a few defense DSTs I would add off the waiver wire for week 10 of the fantasy football season.